Hey there, I'm going to be showcasing my Object Randomizer plugin. The link will be in the description below, or you can find it on Roblox's website under plugins. I decided to create this when I was building a map and had to place a lot of different objects, and I wanted it to look more natural, so I was going through and manually changing the orientations and rotations and the sizes, and that gets to be a pain when you're dealing with a lot of parts. So I decided to write this plugin to do it for you. So when you go to the plugin page, hit install. It will install it to your studio. And I have a map here I've been using for testing. Now when you start it up, it's going to have a GUI here. It will have a tab here with instructions at the top. I will be going over most of that here in this video though, but those instructions are there if you need them. To note, it will create a randomizer GUI element in your starter GUI, so you can remove that when you're done. And also in your workspace, it will create this objects folder. Those are the only things it will add to your game besides the objects that it creates. So if you have a map here, the first thing to do is hit the set area button, and that will create this area object right here in your workspace. Now the idea is that it will take any part or model you have. When you click on it, it will put it into the object to copy field here. You can enter in the number of copies you would like to make of it. And then when you hit the generate button, what it does is it raycasts straight down from the area until it hits terrain, and it will place the object there, or a copy of the object. Now it is randomized, so if you don't like how it ends up, you could just hit the undo button and try again. And you can keep going until you get something you like. Or you can layer different generations on top of each other until you have things filled to your satisfaction. Now it does work for both parts and models, and it will do any amount of copies up to, I believe, 999. Now when you get that high, it will take a while to complete. So if your computer's slow or you don't feel like how it's going, you can hit the cancel button. It will stop it at that point. After you stop it though, you will have to hit undo to get rid of whatever it generated. Alright, so I do have a lot of settings here that you could play around with for this. For one thing, you could change the size of the area that it generates over. You can either change it here in the workspace, either the size or the position, and it will update in the GUI, or you could type directly into the GUI and set area, and it will set the area to that size or position. I do recommend keeping the Y value for the size at 1, simply so it's not taking up too much space and it's easier to see where it will cover. Another thing is I designed it originally to just place on terrain, but it can also place on parts as well if that is what your map is made of. However, you would have to click this place on parts button to make sure it knows that it's going to be placing on top of the parts. So I'm going to reset the area, and And there are a lot of different options in this game to try in this plugin to try to help you create the most natural settings possible. The first one, let's pick our pine tree here, and let's do 100 copies, but I'm going to reduce this area. First option is this perpendicular setting. If you check that, when you look at the ground, you can see it's not even. Like here, there's hills. You may not always want things to come up straight out of the ground. Trees usually do grow like that, but in some cases, you might not want that. So if you want it to come out perpendicular to the ground, you hit this box, hit generate, and you could see how it matches the angle of the hill. That's one of the first settings you could play with. You can also set a random scale variation. It will either go to 50% to 150% of the original size. Use the slider to set whatever you want, hit generate, and you will see there's a lot of different size variations now. On top of that, you can change the rotation of each one. For instance, I have these palm trees that when you generate, all point the same way. That doesn't look very natural. So you could change the rotation up to 360 degrees, and now they will spin all around. And that looks a lot more natural, how they would naturally grow. You can also adjust the inclination, which is how far it tilts away from straight up. This is easiest to see with just a part. And you can see it creates all kinds of wild things with this. But if it's straight up, they look like that. But you can also get an inclination up to 90 degrees. For the most part, you don't want this to go too high, especially for plants and foliage, because trees don't usually grow that far off from straight up. But sometimes that may be the effect you're going for. Another option is this depth slider here. This determines how deep underneath the surface it will put the end of the model. In some cases, you might want it right on the surface. But depending on the model, you might end up getting some clipping from the trunk, and you may not want that. So you might want to put it a little deeper. And this percentage here is actually as a percentage of the midpoint. So if you put this all the way up to 100%, that will put it down up to halfway up the model. So trees, you probably wouldn't want that high. Just a little bit so that the trunk would be underneath the ground. But other instances, like rocks, if you place those right on top, they look kind of funny. So let's sink them deep. And that looks a lot more natural. Rocks actually might be a good one to benefit from the perpendicular setting, to make it look more like they're placed there. You know what? Let's play around with this a bit. Let's change the inclination, rotation, a little bit of scale variation. And there we go. That's not some bad rock generation right there. again, this is all random, so if you don't like one setting, undo it and try again until you find something you do like. Now, last thing is one of the neater things I think about this particular plugin compared to like Brush Tool is I put in an automatic clustering effect where, let's say you have a forest, but you don't want the trees evenly spaced. You want them in like patches. Well, naturally they would tend to cluster into groves. So what you can do is change the maximum size of each cluster of trees or whatever object. Change the density slider. This is a measure of how many studs away they will be at max from the center of the cluster. And it goes from the least dense is 59 studs away to the maximum is 10 studs away. If you don't want any clustering, you could put the max size as 1. But let's try this with clusters of 10. And you can see it grouped them pretty closely together. And there may be cases this is the effect you want to go for. Let's try that again, but adding a little bit of scale variation and some rotation, maybe just a little bit of inclination. And yeah, that looks pretty good. It might need some manual touch-up. No idea what happened here. I had perpendicular check, that's why. There we go. Now we've got some pine tree grove looking things going on. But there's a lot of fun things you could potentially do with this. I thought of it for trees and grass, things like that, rocks. If you're doing like an underground map, you could make little jewel clusters. It doesn't have to be square either. You can make it any kind of shape you want as long as it's rectangular. So I've got this jewel. Let's make 200 of them. Some scale variation, rotation, a little bit of inclination, not much depth. But let's make some dense clusters. And here we go. And you can see we've got a nice bit of crystal. This would make a nice little crystal field down here. And let me see, maybe setting it to perpendicular will give me a slightly different effect. But the main idea here is to play around. Try different things, use different models, see what works for you. If you have any bug reports or any other problems with the script or the plugin, please let me know, and I will try to fix those as they come up. Otherwise, I hope you find it useful, because it was a pain making it, but I really enjoyed it, and I learned a lot from doing it. So thank you very much.